In this Component 1 screencast, we're going to start to develop your understanding of core sociological theories by looking at a perspective called functionalism. And this perspective, functionalism, is one of a number of core sociological perspectives that we're going to be looking at in the next few screencasts. Now, most theories have a very distinctive image of what society looks like. And for functionalists, society is a system. Society is like a machine made up of different parts that are interlinked and interdependent. Now, in the previous screencast, we talked about the different ways in which we might categorize sociological theories. And one of the ways in which we categorize sociological theories is in terms of the structure-agency debate. And functionalism is a good example of what we call a macro perspective. Okay, it's a theory that looks at society as a whole, and it's a good example of what we call a structural perspective. So remember that structural perspectives take a top-down view of this relationship between society and the individual. In other words, individuals are less important than the overall structure of society. So functionalists emphasize the power of society over the individual. And from a functionalist perspective, we shouldn't simply see society as a collection of individuals. From their perspective, society has a collective reality over and above any individual. And in this sense, the argument is that society works like a crowd. Society comes, like the crowd, to have a life of its own, and we get coerced to behave in certain ways through it. And in this respect, society is like a hidden hand that persuades and coerces people in their daily lives, making us do things that we may not always want to do. Think, for example, about the pressure on individuals in our society to go to school or to go to work, or the pressure to get married, to form a family and have children. So functionalism is a theory that begins by recognizing the extent to which our lives are guided by social structure. And what the term social structure means in this context are those particular features of society, such as roles, legal frameworks, customs, norms, belief systems, values, those features of society that constrain people from doing one thing or force them to do another thing. So functionalists argue that we are made to follow certain patterns of behaviour by the various social institutions that produce us, be that the family, the education system, religion, the media, and so on. And so we learn the culture of society through socialisation from these particular institutions. So we're born into a culture and then we're made to fit into that culture. We live our lives by the roles, values, norms and customs that are passed on to us through a process of socialisation. And in fact, functionalists argue that the basis of social order is value consensus, is a shared commitment to common beliefs and social norms. From a functionalist perspective, this is the glue that holds society together. This is what makes order and stability possible. And if people had very different values and followed very different social norms, they would be pulling in different directions, and this would lead to societal breakdown. Okay, having established the functionalist ideas about the relationship between the individual and society, let's now explore in a bit more detail the way in which functionalists analyse the overall structure of society itself. And I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that functionalists see society as a system made up of different parts that are interdependent and interlinked. For example, some functionalists compare society to a living creature, and this is what is known as the organic analogy. And according to this particular model of society, just as all of the organs of a living being, such as the heart and the lungs and the brain, etc., perform their own functions that enable the body to remain healthy and stable, it's also the case that if we look at society, it's made up of different parts, different social institutions that also play really important roles in keeping society in a stable, ordered condition. And like the organs of a body, these social institutions have to all work together, and if one fails, it can have a disastrous effect. In fact, functionalists would argue that we can only fully understand the functions of a particular institution in society, such as the education system, by examining its relationship with other institutions, such as the family and the economic system. So for functionalists, the job of the sociologist is to discover and explain the functions, which simply means the roles played, by different institutions in society in ensuring that society is stable and healthy. And also to explain the various ways in which these social institutions work together, or to use the jargon, are interdependent in fulfilling their functions. For example, if we take the role or functions of education in a modern society, we can identify a number of important contributions that education systems play in maintaining a stable and healthy society. For example, education systems act as secondary agencies of socialisation, and in this way the education system is continuing the work done by the family in the primary socialisation stage. Education is also closely related to the economic system, because education helps to sift and sort people into their future occupational roles on the basis of things like hard work and individual ability. So in focusing on the positive roles played by social institutions, we can categorise functionalism as an example of a consensus approach in sociology. In other words, an example of a perspective that looks at how the social system helps everybody within society. And functionalists argue that just as the human body has basic needs, such as oxygen, water, food and shelter, the same is true of society. Society also has basic needs, or to use the jargon, functional prerequisites, that have to be met if it is to continue to exist in a state of health. And the functionalist writer Talcott Parsons identified 4 basic needs that all societies have. So firstly, there's what he calls adaptation, and this is the way in which the social system has to satisfy the physical material needs of its members by providing them with adequate food, clothing, shelter, etc. And this we can obviously relate to the operation of the economic system. Second prerequisite identified by Parsons is goal attainment. So there's a need for society to set directions, both for individuals and for whole groups. And for society as a whole, this is an important function that's carried out by the political system. Social integration is another basic need of society identified by Talcott Parsons, and this is about making sure that individuals feel that they belong to a community that is larger than themselves. Think, for example, about the important integration role performed by symbols of patriotism and national identity. And then the 4th basic need of any society, according to Talcott Parsons, is what he calls latency or pattern maintenance. And this is about the socialisation and social control aspects of society. It's about ensuring that culture is transmitted from one generation to the next, and that individuals feel compelled or coerced to adopt that culture. Okay, the last part of the organic analogy is this idea that just like living organisms have to evolve and adapt to changes, that the same is true of societies, that societies also have to evolve in order to cope with new demands and new needs. For example, the functionalist writer Talcott Parsons argues that healthy societies exist in a state of balance, or as he terms it, equilibrium, and that this balance is self-regulating. And all that he means by this is that because the social institutions that you find within society are interconnected, that changes in one part of society will inevitably lead to changes in other parts of the social system in order to bring society back into a state of balance. Okay, now that we've finished this introduction to functionalism, the next thing that you need to do in preparation for the lesson is to go onto iLearn, click on this particular button, Sociological Theory, Component 1, and then what I'd like you to do before the lesson is to have a go at this online lesson on functionalism. So click on this particular button and you'll be guided through a really effective and interactive web-based lesson that will really develop your understanding of some of the ideas that I've introduced in this video.